In today's episode, Magdalena asks, can you share 2 or 3 good practices of using data and tracking our efforts? I want to pivot on this question a little bit because there's an important question here, and that is some of the best practices in using our data, understanding some basic statistical and mathematical principles that, for one reason or another, many marketers may not have that solid understanding or past experience in using this kind of data. Yet it's important because we will make a lot of claims from our data and not necessarily be able to back up those claims. So we won't be able to present in a way that inspires confidence in what we're reporting. So let's look at a few of the most basic rules. Number one, by far one almost everyone's heard, correlation is not causation. When we look at our data, we have to understand that a correlation, an association between two variables does not mean that one variable causes the other. The most famous textbook example of this is the number of deaths due to drowning in the summer goes up, and so does the number of amount of ice cream eaten during the summer goes up. So of course ice cream causes drowning. No, we know intuitively and can prove out in the data that the confounding variable, the interfering variable there is summertime, right? It's the weather is what causes both to go up. So in a marketing sense, understanding that, for example, just because our social media traffic goes up or our social media engagement goes up and our Google Analytics web traffic goes up does not necessarily mean that one follows the other. We have to prove that using the scientific method, which brings me to my second principle, which is never ever manipulate the data to prove a point of view. This is something that really only the worst marketers do, and the reasons for doing it most of the time are not malicious. Most of the time it's to cover your butt in front of executives and stakeholders and stuff, but don't do it because it always comes back to bite you. Instead, what you should be using is the scientific method, which is the asking of a question, the gathering of the data, the creation of a hypothesis that you prove true or false, then the testing, analysis, and then refinement, and then deployment of your observations or the refining of your hypothesis based on the test results. On yesterday's episode, I talked about how I was doing some testing on my newsletter to see which newsletter performs better, what type of algorithm to put the content together. This is something I want to test. I have a hypothesis that focusing on click-through rate for content that I curate will lead to best performance in email, but I'm not going to manipulate the data in any way to try and show that. I'm going to use the scientific method to test it. So that's number two. Number three is understanding how representative our data is or is not. And this is really important when it comes to any kind of sampling, any kind of surveying, or any kind of qualitative data analysis where we are extracting data. There is no way we can extract all of the data on many topics. I was doing a piece of work recently on some Yelp reviews. There's no way I can extract every Yelp review. It's not realistic. There's simply more being created, so I have to create a sample. In order to make that sample valid, I have to make it representative of the population as a whole. So I couldn't just say I'm going to sample only Chinese restaurants in Boston and then extrapolate that to all restaurants everywhere. That would be extremely foolish. And so I would need to make that sample much more representative. Many times when we're doing marketing, particularly when we're working with social media data, we are intentionally or unintentionally taking samples, and we need to understand how representative of the population as a whole our data is. If we don't understand it, that what biases are in our data, we probably shouldn't use it, or at the very least, we should provide great big flashing warnings talking about how biased our data may or may not be based on our best understanding of it. Really important. And any kind of tool or software or vendor you're working with needs to disclose any kind of sampling limits or any kind of representation limits in their data. If they don't, you could be making really bad decisions based on highly biased data. One of the most common biases here is social media tools that purport to measure influence that use one network only. Most tools, particularly some of the more primitive ones, rely only on Twitter data, which, because Twitter's API has traditionally been very, very open and accessible. Well, if all of your influencers are on Instagram and try and use Twitter data to calibrate, you're going to get a bad result. So understanding, again, how representative that data is or is not. The fourth is to represent your data faithfully and accurately. And this is important when you're doing charts and graphs and things like that. If you don't have the ability to everyone has the ability to make their charts say whatever they want, but there are some best practices, such as always starting the axes, horizontal and vertical, at 0 in bar charts, for example, so that you can get a true sense of understanding what is in the data, always providing both the absolute numbers and the percentage values so that you can understand the proportions, but also understand how big a number this is. In our recent post on Twitter bot losses and politicians, we looked at one politician who lost 300,000 followers and like huge headlines, but it was 0.6% of that politician's audience. It was a minuscule percentage. So understanding that we are providing perspective so that people can make a judgment about how important the event actually was or was not. And finally, being able to test for margin of error, I think, is so important, and understanding this. And I'm actually going to switch over here to, let's take a look at our data. I'm running an A/B test on my newsletter, and you can see one of the tests here has already been crowned the winner. This is the leading test. I'm testing clicks versus page authority versus social sharing versus, there's a fourth one, the variant, I forgot to rename it, algorithm. What do you see here? I see, the parent. I see the 3 tests after that, and this one here, this third test, has been crowned the winner. Is this a statistically significant result? 197 cent, say, versus 248, 26 clicks here, 30 clicks here. If we were to use software to test out what the p-value is, the likelihood of error, we see that this is a very high p-value. P-value should be 0.05 or less most of the time, and the smaller the p-value, the better. So having a 0.38 indicates that there is potentially a significant issue here. But the software that I'm using, and this is true of so much marketing software, is already crowning a winner. The result is not statistically significant. So anytime you're working with any kind of software which is making a claim about something working better than something else, it needs to provide a p-value. It needs to provide a margin of error. It needs to provide you the statistical back end so that you can look at it and go, yes, that result is valid, or no, that result is not valid. And if the result is not valid, you need to know that before you go and make decisions that could cost you potentially millions of dollars in revenue and marketing performance and things like that. If you don't have statistics in your marketing software, push your vendor to build them in, or change vendors and find somebody who does have that in, because otherwise you could be making really terrible decisions. Again, if I were to say, okay, well, this is clearly the algorithm I should be using for all my newsletters from now on, well, no, I don't know that. I don't know that at all. And so I need to understand what exactly is involved in the statistics of the software so that I can make an informed choice. That would be my last tip, is understand your margins of error and your statistical significance in any time you're working with analytics and marketing. So great question, Magdalena. A lot. I gave you 5 instead of 2 or 3, but these are important principles for any kind of marketing software that you're using that involves data and analytics. As always, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and the newsletter. I'll talk to you soon. If you want help with your company's data and analytics, visit braintrustinsights.com today and let us know how we can help you.